No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live episode number 152. And of course, I have to start today by really expressing my shock, actually, at that terrible plane crash in the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. overnight. I woke up to the news, actually, and seeing the video in the middle of the night, it just really felt like something that should not have been allowed to happen here. I think, it's just so wrong. But we can take a little look at what actually went down, and you can see at the bottom of the screen there, of course, it was the military helicopter that just collided into the passenger jet, which we have learned was traveling from Kansas, holding a whole load of champion ice skaters. And because of the bizarre way in which we live today, many of the passengers on board had actually posted from the plane. So even though air travel, let's just be honest about it, remains probably the safest method of transportation, seeing something like that happen in a city like Washington, D.C. is very, very upsetting. Now, this is really odd. Do you remember yesterday? If you were with us yesterday, Father Calvin Robinson was here. Everything was completely normal. I had no idea there was a storm brewing, and in fairness, neither did he. But within just a few minutes of coming off air, all of a sudden, Father Calvin had been cancelled again, with headlines all around the world suggesting he had been sacked because he had copied Elon Musk's, quote, Nazi salute. Now, of course, Elon Musk never gave a Nazi salute. This is actually what he did.
And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you.
It was from the heart. We know that. It was from the heart. And let me show you now what has just got Father Calvin cancelled.
This is the last stand for Christendom. It's make or break time. The whole of the old world is crumbling. Every country in Europe is embracing death. America, as far as I could see, is the only country fighting for life. And that's down to you guys. So God bless all of you for what you're doing. Please keep doing it. I hope that I can encourage you. And my heart goes out to you. God bless.
So clearly a joke. I mean, you can say, maybe it's not funny. That's fine. But should Calvin have lost his career? Well, of course not. This one's very personal to me. And it comes on the same day that the governor of HMP Woodhill has just banned Tommy Robinson's friends from seeing him at all. So this political prisoner in solitary confinement now can't see anyone. So in my digest next, I'm just going to draw parallels, actually, between the treatment of Father Calvin Robinson and Tommy Robinson. No relation, by the way. Then, the chairman of the Great British Political Action Committee and the former deputy leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib, joins me live as he calls for all immigration to the UK to be stopped now. Also coming up on the show today, Piers calls for a new Brexit vote, despite previously claiming that he respected the result despite voting Remain. And Katie Hopkins, she has a hilarious reaction to the revelation that Sly News is going to be shut down. And I promise you, Burley, she's not going to like it. I'll show you that. Then in the Uncancelled Aftershow, which is on Substack, www.outspoken.live, you can sign up now. Lady Colin Campbell unleashed after Tucker Carlson claims Meghan Markle does not represent black people in the UK. I repeat, www.outspoken.live. Plus the return of Greatest Britain and Union Jackass, but it is now you who gets to decide who is the worst person in the world on this particular day. Today's nominees: Peter Mandelson, nominated by Faye, and that's because of his screeching U-turn on Donald Trump. Sarah Booth, actually, when she was nominated, I like this. She described him as Sir Mandel Slime. Nominee 2, Lisa Nandy, nominated by Markets Only Me 44 for looking for ways of keeping the BBC well funded before the broadcaster's charter ends in 2027. And nominee 3, John Swinney, the First Minister of Scotland, nominated by Lisa because the Scottish government keeps on losing money. vote in the live chat, and the results will be revealed at the end of the show. I'm so happy for the return of Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. But now, let's go. Like Jesus Christ himself, the persecution of Father Calvin Robinson for being a man of God is unrelenting, with even his own church now expelling him for a joke, mocking the left's insane reaction to Elon Musk's heart salute. Now, I'll take you through this ludicrous response to what was very obviously a gag, which received a rapturous response at the pro-life conference in just a moment. But before that, I must say that this egregious mistreatment of Calvin is really personal to me, because Calvin is the most loyal man that you could wish for as a friend. Remember, he lost his show at GB News for supporting me. He lost a very comfortable salary and a life in the mainstream media because, unlike most of my other former colleagues, he was not prepared to stay silent when he saw a great injustice and MSM beat up in action. So I won't stay silent now. I also note that it's very telling that there appears to be far more outrage over Father Calvin's salute gag. And I know it's a gag that many of you might consider to be in bad taste, but there is far more outrage over that than today's resignation of the Bishop of Liverpool over sexual assault claims. And I think that tells you something about the state of our society. But let me take you through what happened here. So we all remember Elon Musk's heartfelt response to the rally crowd on the night of Trump's inauguration, which the crooked and corrupt fake news media attempted to suggest was actually a Hitler salute.
And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you. My heart goes out to you. It is thanks to you.
And you saw that it was all about from the heart. He wasn't coming out as a Hitler supporter. So to end his speech, Father Calvin was making a very obvious reference to the MSM overreaction to that moment. But look, watch and judge for yourself.
This is the last stand for Christendom. It's make or break time. The whole of the old world is crumbling. Every country in Europe is embracing death. America, as far as I could see, is the only country fighting for life. And that's down to you guys. So God bless all of you for what you're doing. Please keep doing it. I hope that I can encourage you. And my heart goes out to you. God bless.
Clearly cheeky, right? Within context. Now, if you want to suggest that no one should ever make a joke involving a Nazi salute whatsoever, then okay, that is an argument. But to lose your religious role over that, well, it's insane. But that is what happened. So Father Calvin was here yesterday recording a live episode of Outspoken. And by the way, I'm not cancelling him if anyone wants to know. But as soon as he came off air, a statement from the Anglican Catholic Church dropped online, and it read, at approximately 3 p.m. today, members of the College of Bishops of the ACC were made aware of a post made on X showing the end of a speech made by Calvin Robinson at the National Pro-Life Summit in Washington, D.C. In it, he closed his comments with a gesture that many have interpreted as a pro-Nazi salute. While we cannot say what was in Mr. Robinson's heart when he did this, his action appears to have been an attempt to curry favour with certain elements of the American political right by provoking its opposition. Mr. Robinson had been warned that online trolling and other such actions, whether in service of the left or right, are incompatible with a priestly vocation and was told to desist. Clearly he has not, and as such his licence in this church has been revoked. He is no longer serving as a priest in the ACC. Now, the reaction has been one of fury, unsurprisingly. Alison Pearson, great woman, she posted on X, Calvin Robinson is a deeply good and holy man. He loves his job as priest at Grand Rapids, Michigan. He would never give a Nazi salute. Upset to hear the Anglican Catholic Church has cancelled his license. Pray they reconsider. His close friend and Fox and Father co-host Lawrence Fox was equally outraged.
The left, ironically the very anti-Semitic left, have seized upon as a gesture of some sort of support or sympathy with the right or some sort of Nazi group. It's very obviously a joke to anyone who even has a modicum of good faith thinking. And I just want to say to the bishops that, did you consult your congregation? Did they know what Calvin was doing? Because it's pretty obvious to literally anyone with a brain before you take this bad faith action against a truly, genuinely wonderful and honourable man. I don't want to say anything that will prejudice whatever moves forward from him, but we cannot live in this world of cancel culture, and Calvin has been cancelled more than anyone I ever know, and has shown courage in amounts that no one I've ever known has shown. So please, if you are listening, Anglican Catholic Church, the Lord is merciful, and whether you think it's a joke in poor taste or not, that's fine, but please don't take the worst possible bad faith interpretation of what was quite clearly a piece of mockery and ridicule of the way that Elon Musk originally said. It's a direct copy of what Elon Musk did, and therefore it would seem really unwise to pander to the very anti-Semites who can't bear Jews.
Professor Norman Fenton, having watched that, posted, "I have disagreements with Calvin on some issues, but what Lawrence says here is spot on. It's bad enough Elon Musk was wrongly accused of being a Nazi for his gesture. Cancelling Calvin for jokingly mimicking it is beyond ludicrous. P.S. My dad was a Holocaust survivor." And it is worth remembering why Father Calvin keeps on getting cancelled by the establishment. So when he was here yesterday, just before this all exploded in the MSM, he responded to Suella Braverman, warning that the UK could have an Islamist government in just 2 decades. Watch. It's an Islamist government that would potentially want to introduce Sharia law.
Well, indeed, we're already seeing the fruits of that. We're already seeing Sharia law all up and down the country. I think there are 80 Sharia courts predicted by our own government. So there's probably more than that in reality. So it's already happening, and she's right to call it out. But the shock and the horror from the legacy media when she does call it out is interesting, isn't it? It's almost like they don't want to acknowledge what's going on. I think her speech was fantastic. Suella was able to say things that you and I have been saying for a long time. You know, we call them the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. They're not grooming gangs. They are raping young girls, unfortunately. It's a grave evil. Call it as it is. She used the same term. And that's quite a significant step, because all of our politicians up until now have been saying the grooming gangs. They water things down in order to play nice with the lefty legacy media. But we don't need people to do that. We need people to speak the truth, call a spade, address the problem head on, and try and come up with solutions. We can't have solutions if we can't even identify the issue.
Calvin Robinson, just yesterday. And Calvin then drew our attention to this display on London's Westminster Bridge. Now, as the Outspoken contributor, Tasha Canal, according to Taz, posted about that, this is the same bridge that Khaled Massoud, a Muslim terrorist, murdered 6 people back in March 2017, injuring a further 50 people. How is this allowed? Imagine the families of the victims seeing this shit. This country is going to hell. But it's because Calvin Robinson speaks up against stuff like that that sees him constantly cancelled. It is worth, by the way, outlining just some of Calvin's official denial of the claims against him. So he posted on X, "For the record, in case it needs saying, I am not a Nazi. I gave a talk at a pro-life event that seemed to go down well. I am pleased to have contributed to what I believe to be the most important of causes. The enemy hates that, of course, and the attacks have been painful and plentiful. That is fine and to be expected. The joke at the end was a mockery of the hysterical liberals who call Elon Musk a Nazi for quite clearly showing the audience's heart was with them. Context is key. But sometimes people ignore context to confirm their own prejudices. People see what they want to see. My attempt at dry wit in that typical British way was not a joke at the expense of World War II, nor an admission of my membership in the Nationalist Socialist Party. That would be an incredibly ignorant and bad faith assumption to make. The responses are very telling, though. The people who understand cheer. Those who have eyes to see. The people who do not want to understand reach for their pitchforks. They have found a new channel for their hatred. He went on, whether a silly old cleric like me makes a poor joke is irrelevant. Do not be swayed and distracted by the enemy whispering in your ears. Focus on the light. And he wrapped it up by saying, you can consider my joke crass, but I ask you to consider if your responses have been proportionate. And of course it's not proportionate. Of course it's not. But most people are too scared to stand up for those being unfairly cancelled. Don't I know it? And then I start to see the obvious parallels between the treatment of Father Calvin Robinson and Tommy Robinson, who has now had virtually all visitors banned at HMP Woodhill, where he is a political prisoner in solitary confinement. Now, I have to say, I feel some responsibility for this because it was actually my report here on Outspoken after I spoke to Tommy behind bars in December, where he revealed to me that Axel Rudikabana was a practicing Muslim at Belmarsh prison, that appears to have sparked this crackdown. And it was actually revealed to us by Richard Inman, who said the governor has banned two of Tommy's close friends. And the letter from the governor said, your visit has not been approved based on information that content from that visit is likely to be used on your social media platforms. So there we go, social media. Even though the MSM is dead, as we've seen from the collapse of Sly News this week, they are now targeting the people's platforms. No doubt in part because Elon Musk has agreed to pay Tommy's legal fees. As Ezra Levent, a really good man from Rebel News, he runs Rebel News, he has previously paid Tommy's costs. As he put it, Tommy is in solitary confinement. That's meant as a short-term punishment for misconduct in prison, not as a long-term sentence. Denying Tommy the right to visit with his friends, simply because of their politics, is illegal. They're mentally torturing him. Just like they're now mentally torturing Father Calvin Robinson, in my view. And whether you agree with all that Father Calvin Robinson says, or all that Tommy Robinson says, is not the point. That is not the point in this case. Because we together must stand up against this tyranny of cancel culture. Now it's time for The Outsider. And I'm delighted to welcome the chairman of the Great British Political Action Committee. That's PAC. We're going to talk about that very shortly. And the former Reform UK deputy leader, Ben Habib. And look, Ben, it's really interesting to me because there was a similar attempt to cancel you, actually, over the course of the general election campaign, when you gave an answer to Julia Hartley-Brewer on talk radio, basically saying you didn't want the British Navy to be picking up migrants, and if that meant letting their boats sink, then so be it. But I saw a very similar cancellation campaign against you. So how do you feel about Father Calvin Robinson being defrocked for a joke?
So the debate I had with Julia was a hypothetical one in which I said boats should be intercepted in the Channel and sent back to France, which I still hold by, wholeheartedly hold by. You can't have border enforcement if you don't enforce your border. It's obvious. But her retort was, what if one of them got a knife out and stabbed the dinghy? And I said, well, give them another dinghy. I imagine one brush with the North Sea would get them scrambling back into their rescue boat. And she said, in my view, rather ridiculously, what if they got a knife out again and stabbed this dinghy and ended up in the drink? And I said, well, how long could this go on for? And she said, would you let them drown? And I said, well, look, they made the decision to go into the Channel. They made the decision to stab their boat. They've gone in the drink twice. They're clearly intent on self-harm. If they want to drown, that is their prerogative. And of course, that was the gotcha moment she wanted. It was a hypothetical discussion, completely absurd, but it was a gotcha moment. And no one listens to the interview on either side of that point, but they come to the point and they just clip the point where I say, well, they made that decision. They must suffer the consequences of their own decision, which, by the way, is also something I hold by. People must suffer the consequences of their own decision. Far too much personal agency has been abrogated to third parties, most notably the state. When we were children, I'm sure it was the case as well, Dan, when you were a child, you were younger than me, but, we were made to take responsibility for ourselves, get dressed on our own at quite an early stage, make your own bed, tidy your room up. And I was certainly spanked if I didn't. And so I learnt that, one has to live by one's own decisions. And we've lost that. Every time something goes wrong nowadays, we say, well, it was social services' fault, or it was the government's fault, or something didn't happen, or et cetera, et cetera. And we've got to re-engage with our own ability to make decisions. But that was the gotcha moment they wanted. And Calvin Robinson, you're right, is exactly the attempted cancellation of Calvin Robinson is exactly the same thing. It's self-evident that he was making a joke. Do we live in a post-joke, post-humor era? And perhaps we do, because, when you take liberalism to its nth degree, liberalism being the promotion of the individual and the dumbing down and the muzzling, in effect, of the majority, so that you can promote the individual, if necessary, to the detriment of the majority. Our liberal democracy is now more liberal than it is democratic, much more liberal than it is democratic. Ultimately, you can only do it by banning free speech, because the majority, as I've indicated, have to be silenced. And the minute you ban free speech, you have this kind of nonsense going on where someone makes a joke and they get cancelled because free speech is gone. And you're right to draw a parallel with Tommy Robinson as well. I don't know Tommy Robinson. I do know Calvin, and I know he's got a sharp wit. I don't know Tommy Robinson. I can't advocate for him. I know he said divisive things in the past, etc. But the point about Tommy Robinson, and particularly this incarceration, his him being in solitary confinement now, not receiving visitors, is that his free speech was shut down. And then he was incarcerated. He was given a prison sentence more draconian than so many rioters who've been up and down in the Palestinian not going up and down our streets, chanting hateful things about Israel, etc. No consequences for them. But the Attorney General, who, just to remind people who are watching this, is a political appointment, Lord Hermer, a Labour peer appointed by the Labour Party in July when they won the election, a man who's defended the rights of Gerry Adams, promoted the rights of illegal migrants, a deeply divisive political figure himself, decided he was going to intercede in a civil case, highly unusual. There has to be a matter of national public interest involved for the Attorney General to get stuck into a civil case, decided that this was such an issue. And because Tommy Robinson had shown that film Silenced in breach of an injunction, he directed it towards a criminal court. And then the judge in the criminal court gave Tommy Robinson an incredibly harsh prison sentence. He could have rapped him on the knuckles. He could have given him community service. He could have put a band around his ankle and said, you've got to stay within a certain radius of your home, whatever. There were multiple options, but they incarcerated him. And so when Elon Musk says that Tommy Robinson is a political prisoner, Elon Musk is right. And I'm afraid, this is a slight segue, but I'm afraid Nigel Farage is wrong. And I find it quite peculiar. I don't want this to become a thing about Nigel, whom I love, by the way. I feel obliged to say that in case he should seek to cancel me, but I do love Nigel. The point about Tommy Robinson and that debate, the political prisoner thing, is it's another example of two-tier justice in our country. And people like Nigel and others are perfectly aware of the two-tier justice system that we have because they're calling it out repeatedly. They see it. I've already mentioned the Palestinian marches. They would cite those two Manchester I think there were Pakistani origin guys who broke the nose of a police officer. They weren't charged for a long time.
Yes.
Clearly, there was a two-tier approach to justice there. Even Ruda Cabana got a two-tier approach to justice. You know, his vile crimes were hidden from us. And there was no reason from a contempt of court perspective that we shouldn't have known about his ethnic origin, the vile crimes, etc. So I find it really peculiar that our own, in this case, Nigel, understands that there's a two-tier justice system, two-tier criminal justice system, calls it out when it's being used in favor of promoting forces with which he rightfully disagrees in this country, but isn't prepared to call it out when that two-tier criminal justice system is used against people on our side of the debate. And so, you know, Tommy Robinson, undoubtedly in my mind, a political prisoner and a victim of the two-tier criminal justice system that we have in this country and the move towards the cancellation of individuals and free speech. And just to reiterate, before everyone says you're a Tommy Robinson nutcase, I'm not. I don't know the man. I'm not an apologist for him, but that's what I read and that's what I see. And it'll be the end of democracy if people like me don't come out and call a spade a spade.
Well, indeed. And look, when it comes to cancel culture, I know all about it, don't I? Because
absolutely, you do.
Remember, my cancellation was actually about something someone else said, and I just wasn't offended enough at Lawrence Fox, who we saw earlier. So look, in this case, I think it's absolutely fair not to think that Calvin's joke was funny, while at the same time, by the way, I do think it was funny, but I'm saying if you do think it's not funny, that's fine. It doesn't mean that he should lose his entire career, and especially given his career is a calling. Breaking right now, a brand new opinion poll this afternoon has Reform UK with a 4-point lead. The political tectonic plates are shifting, folks. Let me show you this Find Out Now survey. Reform UK on 27%, Labour 23%, the Conservatives, the third party, 21%, Lib Dems 11%, and the Greens 10%. Ben Habib joins me now. He is the former leader of Reform UK, now chairman of the Great British Political Action Committee, which is attempting perhaps to somehow unite the right. And we will come to that in just one moment. But first, on the issue of immigration, Ben this week has been incredibly clear, writing in response to those numbers, which were just astonishing, suggesting our population is about to explode to 72 million. So Ben has written, there must be an immediate stop on the granting of British citizenship to all immigrants in the UK. Any and all routes must be indefinitely suspended. Net migration, not good enough. So Ben Habib joins me now. Ben, this is a really interesting one because, of course, the Great British Pack is all about bringing the right together somehow. However, it seems to me that what you're saying here, and I do agree with you, by the way, is that neither Reform UK or the Conservatives, who I'll get to in one moment, by the way, are going far enough.
Absolutely. Neither are going far enough. In fact, I mean, the Conservatives, we already know, are quite centrist, from which you can read lefty. And Reform have the impression, they make the impression that they are nationists, strong borders, deregulate, cut taxes, all of that. But they've done a number of things which indicate to any observant individual who's assessing these things without any axe to grind, that they're pivoting towards the centre ground. And one of the aims of the Great British Pack, and one of the problems I think the country faces at the moment, is that what is acceptable political discourse, and we've already touched on it, what is an acceptable, where the centre of gravity is for acceptable political discourse, is actually shifted over a lot to the left. And it's this kind of, uber liberalism, which is dictating that the centre of gravity of political discourse is over to the left. And even those of us who understand that we've got to move radically for a nation-first agenda get hijacked by where the center of gravity is on debate. And so one of the aims that we have in the Great British Pack is to move the center of gravity for political discourse from the left to the right, to a nation-first agenda, so that people like Nigel and Kemi can have the courage to actually say and do what Trump is doing. And then neither of them saying it. So, for example, Nigel is on the record saying he's not worried about the rate of demographic change in this country. He worries about the culture. But of course, one is the other side of the same coin. He is on the record saying that he's against mass deportation. And I understand that there are challenges with mass deportation, but there is no route to getting rid of illegal migrants other than through detaining them and then do your best to deport them. And if you can't deport them, you indefinitely detain them. And we must get a grip of these issues. And the only way we're going to do it is if we move that Overton window to the right and we give our political representatives the cover that they clearly need and the encouragement they need to do the right thing. So the Great British Pack, I'm slightly moving on, but the Great British Pack is going to move that Overton window, and we're not going to be very nice about doing it. We're going to call out people for what they are. This is not going to be us pleading with Nigel or pleading with Kemi to do the right thing. It's going to be us shining a bright light on what they're doing, making sure that the razzmatazz and all the hand gestures and all that they say isn't all that they're going to deliver, and reveal to the people what they're actually believing, where they're taking this country, so that we can force the agenda to the right. And I think we're going to have a lot of cover ourselves and support in doing that, because Donald Trump is doing it across the Atlantic.
Yes.
And if he's doing it, he's setting the agenda. And our political class should be able to take it on board. So it's not going to be us pleading with anyone. It's going to be us pushing people to do the right thing.
I love that. It is so absolutely necessary. I fully endorse this pack. Claire Bullivant, who is very much behind it, is an incredible woman. She was very involved with the Conservative Democratic Organisation. And I think you're right. The problem is at the moment is that Farage and Badenoch are playing far too much to the Westminster insiders, far too much to the legacy media. And what that means is that sometimes they are too afraid to tackle the issues that are so necessary. I mean, credit to Suella Braverman, and we went into it on the show yesterday. If you want to see what she said, you can go back and look at that.
No, she's brave. She's
actually talking about the fact that, heck, if we're not careful, in 20 years' time, this could be an Islamist country. This could be a country with an Islamist government. Those are the types of conversations we have to have. But look, speaking about the Conservative Party, I want to show you this interview that's been going viral, Ben. I only watched it just before the show. Not sure if you've seen it yet, but it's Priti Patel and look, this actually pains me to say this, Ben, because I really like Priti Patel.
I really like Priti too.
She's a great woman in a lot of ways, but unfortunately it has sparked huge backlash, and maybe not unfortunately actually, because the problem is, Ben, even now she still doesn't seem to understand that it was the Conservative Party who flung open our doors to the world and were a big part of the demographic change and the social issues that we are facing in this country. So this is an interview on the Sun's talk show with Harry Cole. It is relatively long, but I think it is worth watching because, let's just say it's a bit of a car crash, Ben.
Some downsides since.
Tell me.
Well, let's have a look at the graph. Net migration.
Yeah.
Look at that. That was on your watch. Where exactly on that graph were you the Home Secretary in charge of Britain?
So, well, we should first of all recognise that we ended free movement.
Yeah, you ended free movement for Europeans and you threw the borders open to the rest of the world, and the graph...
We always said that in Brexit, Harry.
No, come on. That is not fair.
So,
you did not say we're going to hit 1.2 million net migrants.
No, we did not say that.
We're going to allow 1.2 million people into the country.
So let me finish.
In 1 year.
So let me finish. Brightest and the best come into our country. People on skilled work routes and visas.
Is that the brightest and the best?
We've always said, well, look at it's legal migration, Harry. It's legal. People who come here and work and contribute to our economy. Brightest and the best. Look at the points-based immigration system. For the first time ever, Harry, let me give you some facts.
Go on.
For the first time ever, we have a points-based immigration system, counting people in and out. You can turn off the immigration system at any stage in terms of what our economy needs and doesn't need. You know, the government should have done more, absolutely, on skills and training Brits.
Did every one of those 1.2 million people that flooded into the country in the last 3 years, did they need to come here?
So what would you say to the Ukrainians that are in our country?
That's 300,000.
It is now
tops.
300. What would you say to the BNOs? What would you say also to people that came here through
Come on, you're fudging the numbers there.
I'm not fudging the numbers. I'm telling you now.
300,000 Ukrainians on a temporary fix is not 1.2 million people coming to this country to take jobs that you promised were going to go to Sunreaders and people who voted
Those
for Brexit.
are skilled visas, Harry. We made it quite clear. These are people that work, you know, skilled visa routes, all the skills in terms of NHS, people that are working in our National Health Service. We had
Deliveroo drivers.
Pandemic. You remember health and social care visas as well. I'm not fine with it. I haven't said that.
Would you like to apologise to all the people that voted Brexit for the fact that you misled them and saying we're going to take back control of our borders and then you threw them open and let in millions of people?
That is totally distortionary and that's not true. And to be quite frank, we made it quite clear it'd be people from the rest of the world, people with skills, based on our economy. And I think people should apologise for those who are saying that actually...
You would like an apology?
People in the pandemic came here, health and social care visas. What would have happened to our NHS? Are we now saying, are you and others saying we don't need those people in our NHS?
Well, look, unfortunately, Ben, the reason we need so many people in the NHS is because the Tories created this trap and this population explosion. But can you understand why Matt Goodwin has seen that interview this afternoon and said quite simply, I will never vote for the Conservative Party again?
Well, I mean, as you and I both said, I like Pretty, but she got a number of things just factually wrong in answering Harry. Yes, they did introduce a point-based system. And at the time, I was encouraged by the fact that they'd done it, but they set the minimum salary at which people could come into this country at £26,000 per annum, which is about 25% below our already very low median wage in the country. And that basically opened the doors not to skilled labour, but to unskilled labour. And of course, she hasn't taken into account all the dependents that came to the country with those who came to work in our NHS and those who've come on really ridiculous courses to go to really third-rate educational establishments, bringing their wives and children and aunts and uncles and whatever over with them. And now we've got masses of people in this country, a new form of immigration that we've never had before, where they're unskilled. I'm not even talking about cheap labor. I'm talking about people who aren't even working. And the reason I did that tweet saying that we've got to suspend all forms of route to British citizenship or right to remain in this country is because the minute you come to this country, as you and I know, we never get rid of anyone.
Never.
Once you're here, you're here. Yep. And, you know, and we've got now, it's a joke, we've got 1.5 million people, immigrants, on benefits. But take an average of £10,000 per head, that's £15 billion a year we're spending on people who are not low-skilled working in the labour force. They're not even Deliveroo drivers or cyclists or whatever.
They're having a great time. And they can't believe their luck. No, indeed. Well, as Gad Sad calls it, it's suicidal empathy. That's where we're at. There is one other issue that I want to talk to you about in regards to the Great British Pack, Ben. But to do so, I want to show you a little clip of a BBC interview. Now, this was between the Labour MP Polly Billington and Reform UK's chairman Zia Youssef, and it was over the issue of the NHS. And the issue that I have is because Reform UK are so worried about the MSM playing gotcha when it comes to the NHS, they are making promises which I think are not necessarily sensible. But what I want to do is have a look at this exchange, look at the gotcha moment, and then we can discuss it off the back.
Well, I just want to get some further clarification from Zia, because at the weekend, no, this is important. At the weekend, Nigel Farage said everything was on the table, including, for example, the French model, which is about £2,000 a year for a pensioner. So I just want to clear up, when Nigel says everything's on the table, is the idea of pensioners paying £2,000 a year extra to cover their health insurance, something that would be considered or would be an option for reform.
The NHS will remain free at the point of use
So you pay
for everybody
£2,000
when
on top.
Reform are in government. But let's be really clear about it. The NHS is already broken, partly because of catastrophically poor management and no political leadership, and a population explosion. Neither of which is going to change for the next
So
3 to 4 years.
£2,000 could be
And so
paid
we
for
are
by
going to
pensioners.
have a policy for the NHS that is going to be fit and ready for when we are going to come into government,
£2,000
which
could
is 3 to 4
definitely be
years away.
paid by pensioners as an insurance policy in order for them
Can
to
I
be able to
just
get
bring
access
the
to
other?
The
NHS.
NHS will remain free at the
So
point
they'd have to
of
pay
use.
extra.
The
You wouldn't
NHS
rule-
will
You're not
remain
ruling out pensioners paying extra.
So already what we see, Ben Habib, is an MP like Polly Billington and the Labour Party, enabled by the BBC, playing gotcha with Reform UK, because Nigel Farage in the past has quite rightly spoken about the fact that we need to subsidise insurance, the model has to change. And what I'm nervous about, and I'm interested in where you want the Great British Pack to come into this, is that very early on, years and years out before an election campaign, we have Reform UK saying, no, everything's going to remain free at the point of use. Well, I'm sorry, that system doesn't work. Allowing millionaires to receive free healthcare doesn't work. Now, Anne Widdecombe, a really senior figure within Reform UK, for years has campaigned against that approach and said, actually, we do need to have a genuine debate about NHS reform. And I worry that to avoid the gotcha games of Labour and the MSM, Zia Youssef and Nigel Farage have already ruled it out.
So that was what I would call a reverse gotcha moment. It wasn't him saying we're going to privatise the NHS, which would have been a gotcha moment because that's what they all expect people on the right-hand side of politics to do. But it was like, we are going to be the ultimate socialists when it comes to the NHS. And look, it is complex sorting out the NHS, but I'm squarely with Anne. We need to have a very honest conversation about the NHS. Life expectancy in 1948, whenever it was that the NHS was brought into being, was 60-odd years of age. It's now 81 years of age. The treatments that were available back then were quite basic. And, the treatments being offered to patients were basic. We now have very complex treatment. And we can treat many more diseases at vast cost. And all of this is being done on the NHS, together with lots of treatments which perhaps shouldn't be at the door of the NHS. And Zia makes a good point as well, of course, that, we've got a massive population explosion as well. Back in 1948, the population was, 45 million or something? It's now 68 million. You'll have to fact check me on some of these figures. I'm going by memory. But you see the picture being drawn. And we can't just write a blank check for any public service. We've got to be honest about it because we will go bankrupt. The notion, this notion that we take for granted that the UK is the UK, will be all right on the night, which is so British, cannot be taken for granted. Things may not be all right on the night. And we're really on the edge of an economic collapse. And I think what I would have gone back to that Labour MP on is that actually the economy, which is a key component of being able to sustain any form of NHS, is being trashed by the Labour Party. If you do not have a healthy economy, you cannot have a healthy population, and you can't deliver the measures required in order to have a healthy population. You've got to fix the economy in order for the NHS to be fixed. And that's what I would have said to her. And actually, the other retort, of course, is that the most economic damage ever done by any government to this country outside of wartime, which arguably wasn't the government, it was an outside force, was lockdown. That was a massive amount of economic, £500 billion of borrowing.
And we were all saying it at the time, Vin. Well, not all of us,
absolutely.
but all of us here in this conversation were.
Yeah.
Well, no, look, this is why I think
I
it's so
bet that
important.
Labour MP wasn't saying it. I bet that Labour MP
Of course she
wasn't saying it.
Of course she was saying. They were saying lockdown longer and harder. But look, that's why I think the Great British Pack is going to be so important, because the key thing is you guys don't have to be trapped by some of the games that the MSM and the political establishment try to play. And as a result, hopefully you can try and push Reform UK and the Tories to have a proper discussion. Because for me, when it comes to the NHS, and this is a controversial view, of course, but I don't think millionaires should receive free GP treatment. In fact, the problem is if you allow people to see the GP for free, it actually renders the service meaningless. People don't even bother to show up. And you know what? I would much rather pay 10 quid to go and see the GP if that enabled me to receive international standard of cancer treatment, for example, because that's the type of thing that you really need to rely on the NHS for. But that is a debate for another day. Breaking right now, Piers Morgan has called for a new Brexit vote, just as there is real pressure building from Labour and from all the usual suspects to row back all of our hard-fought freedoms. And the Daily Express today leading on that pressure. Starmer really can't be trusted with our Brexit. Well, yes, I was saying that years ago because this was the guy, of course, who advocated for a second referendum, a people's vote, as he called it, even though we'd already had one. But look, let me take you through Piers Morgan's tweet. Then we'll get reaction from Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP. Piers posted on X, "It's now painfully obvious Brexit hasn't worked and is actively harming us economically. It didn't even control our bloody borders. Given the British people would clearly vote overwhelmingly to go back into the EU, we should have another referendum." Now, that is a real letdown from Piers, because Piers was one of these guys who was a Remoaner. He voted for Remain. But in fairness to him, after the vote, he wanted to respect democracy. Not anymore. He's basing this, by the way, on this new poll from YouGov, which shows the number of Britons saying the UK was right to vote to leave the EU, hitting its lowest level since the referendum ahead of the 5th anniversary of Brexit this week. Right to vote leave, 30% down from 3 in November. Wrong to vote for to leave, 55%. But as you'd expect, there's been a big reaction against Piers Morgan here. Sophie Corcoran posted, "No, my generation is someday going to inherit the country, and we should have a right to govern this country in the way we see fit without being told what to do by Europe." Richard Tice, deputy leader of Reform UK, wrote, "Piers, please explain why Germany, powerhouse of the EU, is suffering more than the UK and in recession for 2 years, likely third year in 2025. Why their exports are falling, given in single market and customs union. Why their real GDP is flat since 2019. Our respective struggles are zip to do with Brexit, but due to failed political class obsessed with net zero and mass immigration, both of which have made us poorer. Thankfully, out of the EU, we can work closer on trade with Trump as US will soar. Starmer, though, will fail due to his regulatory fantasies with the EU." And by the way, the new party leader approval tracker shows Starmer, slippery Starmer, as well and truly failing. He is now even more unpopular than fishy Rishi Sunak was at any point in his failed premiership. So Ben Habib is here, former deputy leader of Reform UK, of course now chair of the Great British Pact, but most importantly for this conversation, a former Brexit Party MEP. So Ben Habib, I actually want you to speak directly to Piers Morgan, because as I say, Piers was one of those guys who he was a Remainer, but then he did respect the vote. He no longer believes in that. What would be your message to him? Why is he wrong to advocate for a second referendum?
Well, he's just simply wrong at every level. I don't take much of what Piers Morgan says seriously because he flip-flops a lot, doesn't he? One minute he's pro something, then he's anti it.
Like COVID vaccines now. COVID vaccines, he says,
Yes.
no, I should never have forced you to have a COVID vaccine. Well, at the time, he was saying if you didn't have a COVID vaccine, you shouldn't even receive health treatment, even if you have a heart attack. Anyway, sorry to interrupt, Ben.
But I mean, what I would say to him and to anyone, frankly, who wishes to go back into the European Union, let alone wanting a referendum. I mean, ultimately, they're only saying they want a referendum because they want to go back to the EU. It's not because they want to test the vote. It's they want to go back to the EU. But the EU is the ultimate in the liberal global order. The EU is the most highly regulated organism in Western civilization. It is also one that doesn't recognize nation states. It's taken down borders right across Europe. It is absolutely hollowing out a nation state. So if you care about borders, if you care about the democratic unit that is a nation state such as Germany, France, the United Kingdom, if you care about governance being for the people of those countries, the promotion of their interests, the protection of their culture, effectively the protection of Western civilization, if you care about that, you cannot be pro-EU. Pro-EU is the opposite of protecting Western civilization. And, some people may say, oh, Ben, you're being a bit scaremongering. But look, they don't care. They don't care about nation states. The minute you cease to care about nation states because you want power in yourself, you are getting rid of Western culture, because culture comes through nation states. You get rid of Western culture, doesn't matter where you're from. You can be an immigrant, you can be born in Germany, France, wherever it is. Your parents could be Normans, or they could be from Somalia. Who cares? And that's the end of our country and our cultures as we know them. So if that's what Piers wants, that's fine. But he's wrong. He's wrong to want it, and he's wrong to call for a referendum. The real issue with Brexit, and I've got a real issue with Brexit, is that we didn't get it. We left Northern Ireland behind. We've left a grappling hook from the EU in the flesh of the United Kingdom. They keep yanking that hook. Starmer, therefore, has cover for wishing to go back to the EU. Thankfully, we've got Trump on the other side of the Atlantic, pulling him the other way. But let me just say this. Every single policy instituted by Trump cannot be introduced in the United Kingdom if we rejoin the EU. In fact, in order to deliver his agenda, we are going to have to cut more of our ties with the EU. We're going to have to jettison the treaties that Boris Johnson signed. We're going to have to tear them up because they require us to stay stuck in this liberal global order. And we can't ditch net zero. We can't ditch DEI. We can't genuinely put up our borders. We can't even cut taxes and deregulate if we do not ditch the EU completely. So what does Piers Morgan want? Does he want to watch us to just be washed over by the economic tsunami that will come if we don't react to Trump's incredibly pro-American growth strategy? Or does he want to, does he realize that that's where we've got to go? What does he want? What does Piers Morgan want?
I know, and the problem is that the reason Brexit has never been successful is because we've had people like Piers Morgan doing it down.
Absolutely.
Refusing to allow it to happen from
Absolutely.
the moment the result came in. And it actually makes me so angry because these people claim to be patriots and actually all they want is to be part of the globalist order. It's depressing, but we know that. I mean, we literally have a prime minister. We literally have a prime minister who said he preferred Davos to Westminster, as in he would rather us be ruled by the really, and let's just be honest about this, Ben, shady characters who run the World Economic Forum, rather than allow us to have our own sense of sovereignty. And to me,
absolutely.
that just sums it up.
I mean, that's he's anti-British. And the vast majority of Labour parliamentarians are anti-British. There are some notable exceptions, but the vast majority are. And it's deeply distressing that we have a government that would wish to hand over power to a foreign power, that we have a government that, if it was able to do that, would take down our borders, hand over the control of our military to a foreign power. Starmer's trying to do that anyway, give control of our monetary policy over to a foreign power. All of this that's the end of the United Kingdom. That's the end of the United. Is that what he wants? I mean, it's just horrendous. The prospect is horrendous.
I know, but I think it is what they want, Ben. I mean,
it is what they want.
They literally want us to be controlled. They would be much more comfortable, these people, and you've really got to think about this. For example, during the pandemic, they would have been much more comfortable if our policy had been controlled by the World Health Organization, for example. So that's where I think Reform UK is saying some good things, because we've got to get out of that organisation too. But look, stand by. Ben Habib back in just 1 minute with, I've got to show you this because it made me laugh earlier actually. Katie Hopkins having a real go at the end of Sly News, and that old bore, John Cleese. I'm going to tell you about what's gone on with me and John Cleese, but that old bore John Cleese has become the latest liberal lovey to quit X as a result of Elon Musk. And of course, he wants us all to care about it. But first, the reason you're watching this show is because you know these days it's almost impossible to trust the mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to patrol social media. And that's for a very good reason. Think about it. Brexit, COVID, Donald Trump, all of those big stories the MSM got wrong. But I have the solution, because today's sponsor, Ground News, provides you with a safe way to consume the headlines. Go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out for yourself. But I want to show you this incredible website and app in action. So this is looking at the recent story of Elon Musk's fallout with Nigel Farage over Tommy Robinson. You know that story was whipped up by the left-wing media. But what's brilliant, and this is just an example, you can do this with literally any news story in the world, but with this example, Ground News has collated the 230 sources into one place, and then it instantly shows how the story is being covered by the media, broken down by whether the organizations lean to the left or the right or in the center. That's called the bias distribution service. And if you scroll down, you can see every article about the topic broken down by the political position and ownership of the publication. So in this case, it shows quite clearly that Fox News gave a fair analysis compared to the Mediaite and the Independent, which of course did not. Now, what's more, Ground News actually gets to know you as a news consumer personally, providing you with the news stories you're interested in while also analysing your own biases and coming up with potential blind spots of stories that you might not be hearing about. Now, I know the fact that you're watching Outspoken means you love the news, but like me, you don't trust the legacy media. So Ground News actually gives you the tools to understand the truth about what is going on in the world. I have to be honest with you, I have this app downloaded on my phone. I use the website all the time. It is now the only way I read the news because what it allows me to do is see through the bias, the manipulative tactics, and actually, who wants to rely on the MSM to define what is true? So you can go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. Subscribe through my link today for 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use for unlimited access. I should say too, Ground News is totally subscriber funded. If you support my sponsors, you are supporting my work. I think that is worth saying too. And for less than a Netflix subscription, actually, you can get all of the world's news in one place and think for yourself. This has been a game changer for a news junkie like me. So let me just repeat the address, ground.news/outspoken, or you can click on the QR code if you're watching on YouTube and Rumble, or actually the link is in the description box in the notes below this video. But now, back to the show. Breaking right now, Katie Hopkins has mocked Sly News and Kay Burley after the revelation that the end of the crooked, biased, left-wing news service is very, very close, with the channel preparing to come off all linear platforms by 2030. I think it will be earlier than that. Watch.
Sky News is no more. No one's watching it, so it's going behind a paywall. One thing's for certain, if people didn't watch it when it was free, they're not going to pay to watch it behind a paywall, are they? Stronger bosses would just clear out the whole place, and all Sky News employees are now on indeed.co.uk looking for new jobs. We remember a time when Beth Rigby and Kay Burley told us to lock down whilst they were out partying. Funny how karma comes and bites you in the ass, isn't it, Kay?
Yes, it is. Let me bring in Ben Habib, chairman of the Great British PAC, former deputy leader of Reform UK. Ben, I think Katie makes a very salient point there because Sly News, do you remember during the pandemic, would constantly, and actually it was Kay Burley and it was Beth Rigby that would do it, they would constantly go on press conferences, challenge politicians saying that they should be locking us down harder. At the same time, they were quaffing champagne, breaking all the rules late night in Soho. That was one of the salient moments. But I also think it was the Brexit referendum too, Ben. You'll remember this very clearly. This lot tried to demonize Brexit voters. They tried to portray us as thick. They tried to mock us. They gaslit us by telling us that we actually didn't know what we were voting for.
They still do all of this.
Yeah, they do.
They still do all of this.
No, they do. And don't you think the decline of Sly News, though, is why actually it's sort of indicative, it's representative, I guess you would say, Ben, of the wider decline of the mainstream media?
Yeah, so, I mean, what is happening amongst the populace, and we saw it for the first time in the vote to leave the EU, is a move towards the nation again. Right across Europe, the United States and the United Kingdom, people are recognizing that unless our politicians get a grip of the importance of putting the country first, we will cease to have countries. And people like Sky News and our parliamentarians, to a large extent, are out of step with the people. The people are already there. Did you see that? Did you see the poll? I read about it in the Daily Telegraph. Perhaps it was elsewhere as well. But there was a poll done on each of the Trumpian policies, and over 55% of respondents on every poll agreed with the Trumpian policies, each one of them. And when they asked Reform and Tory voters what they thought of the policies, over 76% voted in favour. The mood of the nation, the mood of Western Europe and the United States, is not with Sky News. It's the other way. And it's not with the BBC. So they need to understand what's happening, recognise it, wake up, and similarly smell the coffee and pivot.
They do, but I think it's too late, Ben.
It's too late.
Because once you lose trust, how can you get it back? And remember, Ben, I mean, this is not a news service anymore. They are activists. Do you remember, Ben? They actually launched, I mean, they had to take it off in the end because no one was watching, but they launched something called the Daily Climate Show.
I know.
And this was just to spread propaganda and to try and terrify us all and lie to us all. I remember they even did manipulative graphics showing how London was going to be underwater. So I don't think they can get that trust back. And the idea that they want people to pay for this content is ludicrous.
Lunacy. It's economic lunacy. Also, do you remember whenever it was summer and we got a moment of heat in the United Kingdom, the weather charts on Sky News and the BBC would show burning hot red, as if the UK was about to spontaneously combust. I wish we had anything remotely close to what I used to remember to be a reasonable British summer. It's been blooming freezing. Anyway, there we are.
I know. Well, look, we've had enough of them. I shed no tears, Ben Habib, for the end of Sky News. I really don't. I have to be honest about that. But I also find it hilarious at the moment, Ben, how what you're seeing with, I guess, how would you describe them? The elite class. I think that is a good term. The elite class are struggling, aren't they? They're really struggling to cope with the fact that we've pushed back and the people are turning against the mainstream media and they hate it. And a perfect example of this is John Cleese. Now, John Cleese, I'll be honest about it, he used to be a real hero of mine. I absolutely loved Fawlty Towers. When Monty Python came back, do you remember that? They did one reunion. No one ever thought they were going to be reunited. And I broke the story when I was at the Sun newspaper and it was a huge deal. And I met all of the guys and it was just a really special time. But John Cleese has gone down a rabbit hole, Ben. He has been very, very influenced and manipulated by the hard left. He lost the plot over the Brexit vote. And he's trusted people like Carol and Byline Times, all the nutty people that we don't actually really have to talk about because they're so crazy. And so John Cleese has now announced, with some fanfare as if we're meant to care, that he's quitting X because of Elon Musk. And he even made a video announcing his move. Watch this.
Hello, twits. I just want to say to all my beloved twits that I am moving to Substack because I think I will encounter a better class of person there. And also, it's not owned by you-know-who.
And of course, on Substack. And by the way, Substack is a great platform, Ben, but it's no different to X because Substack is all about free speech. That's why I use it. That's why I encourage everyone signs up to me on Substack, www.outspoken.live, by the way. But anyway, look, he made his first post on Substack writing, "Hello, today I start using Substack. I used to like Twitter, but always felt very constrained by the 144 limit. This brought problems for the irony challenged who misunderstood a lot of what I was trying to say. This is a particular problem for me because I seem to be regarded as on the left by some people, on the right, and on the right by people on the left. Apparently, this makes me controversial and therefore box office poison. I hope that now I am on Substack, I can offer ideas of greater subtlety to my ex-twits, whom I shall refer henceforth as my followers. So, dear reader, please follow me at a safe distance." And then, just to show that he never moves on, he posted again saying, before I continue my spat with Piers Morgan, I need a little time to research the difference between a memory lapse and actual
It's actually quite funny.
surgery. Yeah, and so he does every now and then have a moment of comedy gold. But it was really interesting. My issue with John Cleese is that when I was at GB News, and do you remember he joined GB News? It was
He did, I remember that.
Mistake.
Yeah.
The show completely bombed. It was really awful. It had no ratings. It was really difficult to make behind the scenes, all of that. But when I joined GB News, we had a decent enough relationship, and I interviewed him, and we were planning to meet up again when he was in London. His wife was a big fan of my show, etc., etc. And then Byline Times started running all of these untrue stories about me, and he jumped on the bandwagon. I just thought, this is not a critical thinker, Ben. This is not someone who actually can look at the facts and work out what's true and what's not. He's actually been totally blinded by a hard left ideology, and I think it's made him quite nasty, and it really is impacting his legacy, Ben Habib. You almost just sort of wish he would stop talking, you know, because Fawlty Towers and Monty Python made him a legend, but he's losing that status, I think.
Well, I mean, you know, the greatest thing about Monty Python and John Cleese was that they would be provocative. They'd force us to think.
Anti-establishment.
And anti-establishment, and that's antithetical to the whole liberal order, which shuts down free speech. And I know that he's made comments against the shutting down of free speech. He's very much against cancel culture. So it's curious that he's pro the EU and so on, because actually to be pro the EU is to be pro the liberal globalist order, anti-democracy, anti the ability to think freely, and all the rest of it. So I think, again, we've got someone in John Cleese, supremely bright, but hasn't really thought about his own political, philosophical framework. Where does he sit? You know, I think he's just, you know, slightly confused. It sounds so patronizing. And I don't mean it that way because, you know, this guy was so witty. He must be so bright, but he does have confusing views on things and they don't seem to be joined up.
No, not at all. They're absolutely not joined up in any way. And yeah, look, I would never tell someone not to express their free speech. I mean, of course they can. But unfortunately, I'd just say John Cleese has proven himself to be someone who is very sucked in by the narratives. And look, he's a Lib Dem, actually. That's what it comes down to. He's a Lib Dem. That's
which is neither liberal nor democratic, actually.
Exactly. Well, look, Ben Habib, how can people... Look, I think a lot of the Outspoken audience are going to be very interested in the Great British Pack. So what can we do? Like, can we join up?
You can go and register. Please register so that we know who you are. We know how to contact you. We've got a policy platform on our website, and you can go and give us your policy ideas. And you can also donate, though I'm not chasing people for money, but if they wish to donate, that's great. You know, we had lots of donations in just on the announcement of the pack. And then the other thing I'd really like you to do, Dan, because you are a first-class interviewer, and I'm not just blowing hot smoke up your proverbial, but I think you are absolutely brilliant. What I'd love you to do is get Claire Bullivant on your show, who is actually the chief executive of the Great British Pack.
I would love to. Okay, well, look, Ben, you have to twist her arm. Because I'm good friends with Claire. I have asked her on Outspoken many times, and she likes to say, I'm the behind-the-scenes woman, which I think is a real shame because she's such a great spokesperson for this country. So no, let's do it, Ben. Let's twist her arm. You maybe will have to come back with her and hold her hand or something, but let's do it because I think my audience would absolutely love Claire Bullivant. But as I say, I'm a big supporter of what you're doing, big supporter of the Great British Pack. And
Thank you.
It's so great to have you back on Outspoken. We will speak very soon.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Now, oh my goodness, it is the tightest vote ever for Greatest Britain Union Jackass. I know we've only been going so far this week, but all of the results so far have been totally clear cut. So this is my final call. If you want to vote for Greatest Britain Union Jackass, do it now in the live chat because it's been topsy-turvy throughout the show. Peter Mandelson for the Trump U-turn and Lisa Nandy for her decision to give all the money to the BBC are battling each other. It is so, so tight. I can tell you John Swinney hasn't won, okay? So this is the last call. If you want to change the vote because it is so tight, the lead keeps changing, go in and vote in the live chat for Peter Mandelson or Lisa Nandy now. While I do that, I just want to take a look at some of your comments over the course of the show. Lots coming in about Calvin Robinson, of course, which is to be expected. Margaret and Stephen Payton posted, they have obviously been waiting for an excuse to cancel Calvin. It was interesting, actually. I was speaking to my friend earlier in the day who has been so supported by Calvin through very difficult times, but her theory was exactly the same. She thought they were looking for an excuse. A slightly different point of view from Kareen KM, who says he should have been reprimanded, but religious leaders get involved with politics, and that's a no-no. Jesus himself said, "My kingdom is no part of this world." And Laura Clegg said, "I'm not surprised at how people in the church have taken action. They are the most judgmental and unforgiving people. I do not feel Calvin did anything wrong. I will never go to church." On Brexit and the whole Piers Morgan debacle, he now says he wants another vote. Maggie Payton writes, "Piers Morgan can jump right back into his basket. We voted, you lost. Build a bridge and bloody get over it." Maggie, that's, oh, yes, exactly. And the thing is, if you keep on harking back, then actually you're talking the country down. And John Capone says, "Piers doesn't know himself, what he wants. He changes depending on his guest." And this is interesting, actually. Ben Habib's got a new supporter tonight. This is from Change Begins. And I don't know if Change Begins is a he or a she. So they said, "First time I've heard Ben Habib talk for a long period because I usually avoid politics nowadays because the Labour and Tories are too alike. It's nauseating and I am a big fan of his now." Okay, we're about to end the vote. But just before I do that, let me take you through the nominations for Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. And okay, goodness, I don't know what we do when it's this close. But anyway, let me take you through the nominations. Nominee 1 was Peter Mandelson, nomination by Faye because of his screeching U-turn on Donald Trump, and Sarah Booth actually also described him as Sir Mandel Slime for his grovelling. Nomination 2, Lisa Nandy, nominated by It's Only Me 44 Mark for looking at ways of keeping the BBC well-funded before the broadcaster's charter ends in 2027. And nominee 3, John Swinney, nominated by Lisa because the Scottish government has revealed there are more untraceable millions. And wow, it's our first tie. So we can't choose. So we have 2 Union Jackasses tonight. 6% of the vote went to John Swinney, but an equal number of votes to Lisa Nandy and Peter Mandelson with 46% of the vote each. I told you it was close. Look, oh, great. And what we're going to do, by the way, is on Friday, we will name the worst person in the world this week. And for that, I'm going to put up a special poll in my community on Thursday with all of the winners of Union Jackass from Monday to Thursday, if that makes sense. So Lisa Nandy and Peter Mandelson will both be available to be voted for. So goodness me, it was a very, very tight one this week. Greatest Britain today. Well, look, there's only one choice. I'm sure you understand why. Father Calvin Robinson wins. I've had so many positive nominations for him. Maggie said they can't stand his popularity. Leeson, who's at Fallen Toa, said Calvin Robinson is a straight talker and doesn't take any shit from anyone. Now, don't go anywhere apart from Substack, because in the Uncancelled After Show today, which you can watch if you sign up at www.outspoken.live, Lady Colin Campbell unleashed after Tucker Carlson claimed Meghan Markle does not represent black people in the US. So I'm going to explain what Tucker Carlson said. We will look at what Tucker Carlson said and then get Lady C's reaction. www.outspoken.live. That's my Substack. Remember, you can sign up to me completely for free on Substack too. Even though I don't agree with John Cleese on many things, the one thing I guess I do agree with him on is that Substack is a really important platform, although, of course, I remain on X. Don't worry about that. So we're back tomorrow, 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble. I promise to keep fighting for you. That is the most important thing. And I hope to see you on Substack in just one moment for the after show with Lady Colin Campbell.